This is a story called The Little Monsters, Chapter 143, Part 3, Bumpy Drama F. Despite being one of my best students, Sarah hasn't reached any of the targets I've set for her to reach this year except at Christmas. All she does is mess about with her friends, disrupt the class, distracts the other kids and talk back and be disrespectful towards me. The other day I wrote a scenario on the board and I asked the kids to get together and come up with a play that the whole class could do as one big group, and Sarah rubbed it off. I wrote it back on the board and stood in front of it. Everyone else wrote down what I'd written, but Sarah refused point blank, along with her friends. This is why I've come to the decision that I have no choice but to fail Sarah. Mrs. Redgrape. Bumpy Music F. This year Sarah hasn't handed in any work I've set for her. All her and her friends do is mess about constantly, disrupt the class, distract the other kids and talk back to me and be disrespectful towards me. Sarah is a very bright, clever girl, which is why it saddens me to have to fail her. I feel that Sarah and her friends would be better off separated next year. Mr. Redgrape. Bumpy, English F. Sarah is an extremely bright and clever girl, but unfortunately this year I have no choice but to fail her. All she does is mess about with her friends, distract the class, refuse to do any of the work I give her to do, talk back and be disrespectful towards me. It saddens me deeply that I've failed her this year. Mrs. Pineapple. Bumpy, Science F. Sarah is disruptive, distracting, inconsiderate and very lazy. She hasn't done any work that I've given her to do. All she's done this year is mess about with her friends, distract the other kids and disrupts a lesson. She messes with dangerous equipment in the science lab that she knows not to mess with. This has left me with no choice but to fail Sarah, which is both heartbreaking and saddening because Sarah is a very bright, clever girl. Bumpy, History F. Sarah is a very bright, clever girl, but it's with the greatest sadness and the deepest regret that I have no choice but to fail her. This is because she's disruptive in class. She constantly distracts the other kids. She constantly messes about with her friends. And she's rude and disrespectful towards me constantly. Mr. Orange. Bumpy, Maths F. Sarah has been really uncooperative, disrespectful, disruptive, rude and distracting. She constantly messes about with her friends and she constantly winds up and distracts the other kids. She hasn't done any of the work I've given her this year. She's so far behind, all I can do this year is fail her. This brings me great sadness and makes me feel really disappointed because she's an extremely bright and clever young lady. Mr. Pear. Bumpy, Geography F. Lately, Sarah has refused to do any of the work that I've given her to do. She constantly distracts the other students by throwing things at them and distracting them. She's very disruptive, uncooperative, rude and disrespectful towards me and the other students. This leaves me with no choice but to fail her. This saddens me and leaves me very disappointed because Sarah's a very bright and very clever young lady. If she knuckled down and got on with what she's supposed to get on with, she'd have a very bright future ahead of her. Mrs. Cupcake. Bumpy. Biology. F. During my class throughout this school year, Sarah has continuously let me and most importantly herself down. She's been constantly disruptive, distracting, uncooperative, lazy and very disrespectful. She refuses to do anything I tell and give her to do. She messes about constantly with her friends. She refuses to listen. This leaves me with no choice but to fail her, which saddens me and makes me feel disappointed, because Sarah's a very bright, clever and capable girl. Mrs. Apricot. Bumpy. Form class. F. This year I've tried my best to get Sarah to settle down and do what is expected of her, but she refuses point blank to do so. She's constantly disruptive, uncooperative, lazy and disrespectful. This leaves me with no option but to fail her, which is a huge shame because she's such a very bright, clever young girl. Mr. Pease. Bumpy. PE. F. During this school year, Sarah has done nothing but mess about with her friends. She talks back and is very disrespectful towards me. She's disruptive and she constantly interrupts me when I'm talking. She refuses to do anything I ask her to do. This is why I have no choice but to fail her, which is a shame because she's a very bright, capable and clever girl. Mrs. Pepper. Bumpy. Games. F. Throughout the school year, Sarah has refused to take part in any aspects of games. She refuses to do anything I say. Instead, she insists on messing about with her friends, disrupting the class, being disrespectful towards me and turning up either without her games kit or a dirty games kit. Unfortunately, I have no choice but to fail her. This saddens me because Sarah's highly intelligent, and if she knuckled down, she'd have a very bright future ahead of her. Mrs. Sultana. Bumpy. Swimming. F. Every week during my lesson, Sarah has done nothing but mess about, both in the changing room and in the swimming pool. She refuses to listen to a word I say to her. She's constantly disrespectful, disruptive, distractive, and lazy. This gives me no option but to fail her. This saddens me because she's a very good swimmer and she's highly intelligent. Miss Woodworm. Creeper. Drama. F. This year during class, Lily has done nothing but mess about with her friends. She throws things around the room and at the other students. She refuses to cooperate and to do as I say. It's with great sadness that I have no choice but to fail Lily, because she's a really good actor and she's very bright and intelligent. Mrs. Redgrave. Creeper. Music. F. Throughout this school year, Lily hasn't done anything that she's been required to do. She's constantly uncooperative, disrespectful, distractive, disruptive and constantly lazy. It's with a great deal of sadness that I have no choice but to fail her. She's a very bright girl with a beautiful singing voice, but I have to stick to my decision and fail her. Mr. Redgrave. Creeper. English. F. This year Lily hasn't done any of the work that I've given her and the rest of the class to do. Throughout all of this school year, she's done nothing but mess about with her friends, disrupt the class, be lazy, be uncooperative, distracting and disrespectful towards me. She's a very bright girl, but I have no choice but to fail her. Mrs. Pineapple. Creeper, Science, F. Recently, all Lily has done is mess about during class in the science lab. This is extremely dangerous as there's always kids using Bunsen burners and their experiment equipment, which is obviously quite dangerous. However, Lily and her friends just don't care, which is highly unusual for them. Lily is constantly lazy, disruptive, distracting, disrespectful and uncooperative. This leaves me with no choice but to fail her, which is a shame, because she's a very bright, clever and capable girl. Mr. Salt. Creeper, History, F. This year all Lily has done in my class is mess about with her friends, distract the rest of the class, disrupt the lesson, throw things around the room and at the other kids. She talks back and is very disrespectful to me. This is so unlike Lily and her friends. I have never known any of them to behave this way before. Lily has not done any work I've given her to do. It's based on this that I feel I have no other choice but to fail Lily. This makes me feel incredibly sad because she's a very bright, capable, clever and intelligent young lady. Mr. Orange. Creeper. Maths, F. It's with a great deal of sadness that this year I have no choice but to fail Lily. I've had to come to this decision because this year all Lily has done is mess about with her friends, disrupt the class, annoy and distract the rest of the kids, talk back and be disrespectful to me, and she's refused to do any work I've given her and the rest of the kids to do. Yesterday I put some sums on the board for everyone to do, and she rubbed them off. The fact that I've had to come to the decision to fail Lily is a shame, because she's a very bright and clever girl. Mr. Pear. Creeper, Geography, F. This year during my class, Lily's been constantly disruptive, lazy, uncooperative and disrespectful. She hasn't done any of the work I've given her and the rest of the class to do. There have been times when I've written stuff on the board and she's rubbed it off before anyone has had a chance to write it down. She talks back and is very disrespectful to me. It's based on this that I have no option but to fail her. This saddens me because Lily is a very bright and clever girl. Mrs. Cupcake. Creeper, Biology, F. This year all Lily has done is mess about with her friends. Constantly. She's very lazy, uncooperative, disruptive and disrespectful. When I write stuff on the board, she rubs it off and then she thinks that it's extremely funny. I've tried everything I can to get her to settle down, do as she's told, and to behave herself, but she just takes no notice of me. Lily is more than capable of doing everything I ask of her, but she just won't. It's a shame because she's a very bright and very clever young girl. Unfortunately, as much as it saddens me, I have no choice but to fail Lily this year. Mrs. Apricot. Creeper, Form Class, F. All Lily has done this year is mess about with her friends, talk back and be very disrespectful to me, distract the other class and refuses to do anything I tell her to do. She's very lazy, disruptive and uncooperative. Despite this, she's very bright, clever and capable of doing what is asked of her. Sadly, I have no choice but to fail her. Mr. P. Creeper, P.E.F. Lily this year has been very disrespectful towards me. She's very lazy, uncooperative, disruptive, and she constantly distracts the other kids. She messes about with her friends constantly and she refuses to do anything. I feel that this year I have no choice but to fail her. This is such a shame because she's a very bright and clever girl. Mrs. Pepper. This Creeper Games F. This year Lily has become very lazy. During my class, she constantly messes about with her friends and she refuses to cooperate. She distracts the other kids and she's disruptive. I've told her time and time again to do as she's told, but she refuses. I feel that I have no choice but to fail her. Mrs. Sultana. Creeper Swimming F. During my swimming class, Lily does nothing but mess about constantly with her friends. She talks back to me and she's very disrespectful towards me. She throws things in the pool constantly. Last week she threw a bench in and it almost hit the other kids. I told her to stop but she refused to listen. She's not reached any of the goals she's supposed to reach during my swimming class, leaving me with no choice but to fail her. This is such a shame because she's a fantastic swimmer. Miss Woodworm. Kicker Drama F. Apart from at Christmas, Lucy has refused point blank to take part in any aspects of my class. She does nothing but constantly mess about with her friends. She's very disruptive, lazy, uncooperative and disrespectful. I feel that I have no choice but to fail her. This is such a shame because she's one of the best swimmers in my class. She's a very bright, capable and clever girl. Mrs. Redgrave. Kicker. Music F. Throughout this school year, Lucy and her friends have done nothing but constantly mess about. She's lazy, uncooperative. She talks back and is disrespectful to me. She's a beautiful singer and a very talented musician, but despite this I have no choice but to fail her. I wish that I could give her a better grade, but sadly I can't. Mr. Redgrave. Kicker English F. This year Lucy hasn't submitted any work at all. During my class, she does nothing but constantly mess about with her friends. She's lazy, she talks back, and she's very disrespectful to me. She's uncooperative, disruptive, and distracting. She constantly throws stuff around the room and at the other kids. This leaves me with no choice but to fail her. This is such a shame because she's a very bright, clever and capable girl. Mrs. Pineapple. Kicker, Science, F. This year I've had to make the tough decision to fail Lucy. This is because she's lazy, disrespectful, uncooperative and disruptive. All she does is run around the science lab chasing her friends, knowing that there's dangerous equipment in there. She talks back to me and refuses to do anything I ask of her. I don't know what's come over Lucy and her friends lately, but lately they just will not cooperate at all. This is why I've made the decision to fail her. Mr. Salt. Kicker, History, F. This year I don't know what's got into Lucy. All she seems to do is mess about with her friends. She's constantly disruptive during my lesson. She's disrespectful and she talks back to me. Just yesterday I put some work on the board for everyone to do, and she rubbed it off. When I wrote it back on the board, she rubbed it off again. She leaves the classroom without permission, with her friends. She's lazy and she doesn't do anything I ask of her. It's based on this that I made the unfortunate decision to fail her. This breaks my heart and saddens me because Lucy's a very bright, clever and capable girl. Mr. Orange. Kicker, Maths, F. This year during my class, Lucy has become very lazy. She's very disruptive, distracting, uncooperative, and she talks back and is very disrespectful to me. When I write on the board, she rubs it off every time. She refuses to do everything I ask of her. This is why I've come to the decision to fail Lucy. This is such a huge shame because Lucy is a very bright, clever and capable girl who is capable of doing so much better. Mr. Pease. Kicker, Geography, F. This year I'm extremely disappointed with Lucy. She messes about constantly with her friends. She's very lazy, disruptive, uncooperative, and she talks back and is disrespectful to me. She refuses to do anything I ask of her. She rubs everything off the board that I put on there before the other kids have a chance to write it down. Based on all the above, I have no other choice but to fail Lucy. I strongly feel that her and her friends should be separated into different classes. Mrs. Cupcake. Kicker, Biology, F. This year, Lucy will not do as she's told in any way, shape or form. All her and her friends do is constantly mess about during my lesson, distract and disrupt the rest of the class, be uncooperative and disrespectful. I don't know what's going to Lucy and her friends because they're not usually like this. Lucy is usually such a good girl who is very bright, clever and capable. However, this year I feel that I have no choice but to fail her. Mrs. Apricot. Kicker, Form Class, F. Unfortunately this year, I have no option but to fail Lucy. I've made this decision because Lucy hasn't done any of the work she's been required to do, not just in my class but in all her other classes too. She's disruptive, distracted, lazy, uncooperative, disrespectful and rude. All she does is constantly mess about with her friends all the time. I feel that Lucy and her friends would be better off in separate classes. This is a huge shame because Lucy is a very bright, intelligent and capable girl. Mr. Pease. Kicker, PE, F. All Lucy does during my class is constantly mess about with her friends. She refuses to change into her PE kit, and when she does, it's creased and dirty. She never does anything that I ask of her. It's because of this that I have no other choice but to fail her. This makes me feel very sad because Lucy's a very bright, clever and capable girl who can do so much better. Mrs. Pepper. Kicker, Games, F. I have no idea what's gone into Lucy this year, but all she does is constantly mess about with her friends. She refuses to take part in any aspects of games. She talks back and is disrespectful to me. She's distracted and very uncooperative. It's based on this that I have no option but to fail her. Mrs. Sultana. Kicker, Swimming, F. This year Lucy hasn't reached any of the goals I've set for her to reach. She constantly messes about with her friends, disrupts the class, and distracts the other girls. She talks back and disrespects me constantly, and she's uncooperative. I feel I have no choice but to feel Lucy this year. I feel this is a huge shame because she's a very strong swimmer, and if she had a mind so, she could be an Olympic swimmer. Mrs. Woodworm. The first one to see the kids' reports before their parents was Mrs. Scott, and she got all 6 of them in her office and said to them, what on earth has got into you kids? Why have you all behaved in such a bad way that your teachers have had to fail you Why have you all behaved in such a bad way that your teachers have had to fail you all in every class? We don't care, miss, said Kicker. Oh, really? Well, you will care as soon as your parents see your reports, said Mrs. Scott. Mrs. Scott arranged a meeting with all the kids' parents, and when she showed them the kids' reports, they all went mental. The kids were told by Mrs. Scott that they had to stay in during playtime, lunchtime, and for 2 hours after school until they caught up on all the work that they'd missed. The kids did as they were told for once, and they caught up with all the work they'd missed and got the highest grades possible. See, kids, see what you can accomplish when you put your mind to it. All that hard work paid off. I'm extremely proud of you guys. When the kids' parents saw their new school reports, they couldn't have been prouder if they tried. End of chapter 143, part 3. Written by me between 19th and the 29th of this month. It's been a roller coaster, but it's finished. Finally, chapter 143 is finally finished. Remember guys, if you're watching on YouTube, please feel free to like, share, comment and subscribe. If you're watching on Facebook, please feel free to like, share, comment and to go to my YouTube channel and subscribe. Thanks for watching guys. See you in the next chapter. Love yous. Bye.